Hi, Edge community. It is a pleasure to speak with you today. My name is Caroline Fleck. I am a licensed psychologist, adjunct clinical instructor at Stanford, and author of the book Validation. And that is what I'm here to talk to you about today, validation, what it is, why it's important, and how to provide it. But before getting into that, I want to tell you a story. And content warning, it includes a reference to suicide. So, this is a true story and one that I discuss in my book. And the reason I chose to open with an anecdote rather than all of the research I've done on this topic is because I think it does the best job of substantiating one of my boldest, albeit less empirical claims, which is that validation is a superpower. Here's the story. I was a doctoral student at Duke University, getting trained in a type of therapy called dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT as it's known. Across from me was a 28-year-old man who just said he wanted to kill himself. I should mention that DBT is a treatment for a condition known as borderline personality disorder, which may include symptoms of self harm or suicidality. Our therapy session was being broadcast live to a classroom of other therapists and my supervisor. And behind the patient was a monitor where my supervisor was typing her feedback to me in real time. The words, always assess risk at the start, appeared on the screen. I looked at the clock. We were in the last 5 minutes of an hour-long session. I jumped into action, asking a series of questions to assess his risk. He shared that he'd broken up with his partner 2 nights earlier. He hadn't brought it up because he did not want to spend the whole session talking about it. As we were winding down, though, he started thinking about returning home to the empty apartment that they had shared. He didn't think he could handle another night on his own. Fortunately, I knew what to do. I had to help him use the skills he was learning in therapy to regulate his despair in session, and then come up with a plan to make sure he could use those same skills at home. If I couldn't pull this off, I'd have no choice but to hospitalize him against his will, which, for the record, is the fastest and surest way to get fired as a therapist and sour your patient on the therapy they desperately need. So I wanted to avoid that. But I had a problem. He did not want to talk about stupid skills. His words, not mine. He didn't want to talk about skills or the breakup or anything that might shift how he was thinking or feeling. The more I pushed, the more he withdrew. I looked at the monitor for answer. And to this day, I can still see the letters VALIDATION, validation, appearing in bold. At first, I was confused. He had just said that he didn't want to talk about the breakup. Then it clicked. I said something like, well, this sucks, which got his attention. I continued. You let down your guard for 1 second and you're immediately attacked with questions from the overzealous graduate student that you want to believe cares, but is most likely just doing what she's told. And to make matters worse, this whole awkward scene is being broadcast to a group of people you've never met. At this, he smiled and said something to the effect of, I'm usually pretty good at tuning that out. Thanks for reminding me. I said I was too, but at the moment it was distracting me. And with that, I got up, turned off the monitor, and suggested we take a walk. Once we were outside, I completely abandoned my approach of trying to reason with him. Instead, I just focused on trying to put myself in the shoes of this devastated and vulnerable person who desperately needed help, but had learned not to trust anyone who offered it. When we got back, we got to work. The session lasted over 2 hours, but in the end, I decided not to hospitalize him, which was the right call. He used the skills we discussed to get through that night, and the night after that, and the night after that. It has been almost 20 years since we worked together. He's a therapist too now, and an excellent one at that. To be clear, there was no smoke coming out of the building, and my patient certainly wasn't waving his arms wildly from a window. But having been in this and countless other situations like it in my career as a DBT therapist, I can tell you this is as close to putting on a cape and flying into a burning building to rescue someone as it comes. Validation is my superpower. I have used it to save lives, marriages, and entire startups from imploding. DBT therapists like me master a set of validation skills designed to help us communicate acceptance while working in highly stressful situations to help clients make incredibly difficult changes. When DBT first came on the scene back in the 1990s, it revolutionized the field of psychology. It proved capable of treating conditions that had long been considered untreatable. And its model of acceptance and change has since given rise to some of the most effective treatments in the history of psychology. Now, I realize few, if any of you, are psychologists, but I think everyone listening to this talk can relate to the experience of wanting to get through to someone. Maybe it's motivating your kids to do a decent job of brushing their teeth or managing upward. Maybe you just want your parents to stop using the group thread to share their political conspiracy theories. Doesn't matter. Point is, everybody wants to be able to influence somebody. And increasing one's influence is just one of the many benefits of being able to validate others. The validation skills I learned made me a better therapist, but they also made me a better mother, partner, daughter, and friend. I'm sharing them with you today because I don't think you should have to get a PhD in clinical psychology to develop a set of skills that will serve you in every single one of your relationships and give you what can only be described as superpowers. Now, before going any further, we need to define what validation means because I'm not talking about parking. And if you thought I was this whole time, then that story about my patient must have been very confusing. So allow me to clarify. Validation communicates that a person is mindful, understands, and empathizes with another person's experience, thus accepting it as valid. It is a signal of acceptance that culminates in the other person feeling seen. There's a viral clip of comedian Jon Stewart speaking at a hearing on whether or not to approve funding for the medical bills of the September 11th first responders. About half of the members of Congress didn't show up to the meeting. And in speaking to their empty chairs, Stewart says, "I'm sorry if I sound angry and undiplomatic, but I'm angry. And they are too. And they have every reason to feel that way." That was validation. Stewart validated the first responders, showing that he was there, he understood, and he cared about their experience, while holding Congress accountable for failing to do so. When I started to cry while picking out wigs after starting chemotherapy, and my husband said, "It's okay to cry. Your hair was part of your identity." That was validation. And this adorable clip that I'm going to share with you from the movie Inside Out also provides a pretty awesome example of validation. Okay, here we go. Yes? It's not presenting? Oh, dear. Uh, oh, shoot. So sorry. All right. Well, let me, uh, yeah, no problem. I will just skip that. Oh, okay. So it didn't share, huh? You guys couldn't see that? You can't see it at all now, or can you? You can see it or no? Oh, okay. Okay. All right, great. Sorry, let me just back up a little bit. Sorry about that.
Me?
Hey, it's gonna be okay. We can fix this. We just need to get back to headquarters. Which way to the train station?
I had a whole trip planned for us.
Hey, who's ticklish, huh? Here comes the tickle monster. Hey, Bing Bong, look at this. Oh, here's a fun game. You point to the train station and we all go there. Won't that be fun? Come on, let's go to the train station.
I'm sorry they took your rocket. They took something that you loved. It's gone. Forever.
Sadness. Don't make him feel worse.
Sorry.
It's all I had left of Riley.
I bet you and Riley had great adventures.
Oh, they were wonderful. Once we flew back in time. We had breakfast twice that day.
Sadness.
It sounds amazing. I bet Riley liked it.
Oh, she did. We were best friends.
Yeah, it's sad.
I'm okay now. Come on. The train station is this way.
How did you do that?
I don't know. He was sad, so I listened to what...
Hey, there's the train.
Okay. Sorry for the technical difficulties on my end there. But that is just, I mean, that is like the very PG version of what I described earlier with my client. So now, to understand validation, it's equally important to distinguish it from the concepts it often gets confused with. Okay. So, first, validation is not praise. Praise is a judgment. It's a positive judgment, but it's a judgment nonetheless. It says, I like the way you look or perform. It's a bulging heart emoji in response to a bikini pic on Instagram, or a great job from a coach after you score the winning touchdown. Validation, however, communicates acceptance. It says, I see you. I accept you, independent of how you look or perform. Second, validation is not agreement. This is a big one, okay? So I am a vegetarian. I haven't eaten meat since seeing behind the scenes footage from a factory farm when I was 26. Having been a meat eater for much of my life, I can understand why someone might not want to be a vegetarian. It's infinitely harder to order in restaurants, and you have to overhaul your entire diet, et cetera, et cetera. I do not agree with a person's decision to eat meat, but I can absolutely acknowledge the valid reasons they might choose to do so. Okay. And as a psychologist, side note, I feel obligated to mention that even if your goal is to change someone's opinion, you're much more likely to succeed if you can figure out how to validate their perspective. Okay. Last but not least, validation is not problem solving. Problem solving attempts to provide support by offering solutions to whatever issue the person is coming to you with. For example, problem solving might sound like, I think you and Priya can work this out. Why don't you organize your feedback into a doc and then schedule a meeting to review it with her? Validation, on the other hand, focuses on acknowledging the situation and the validity of someone's response to it. Validation would sound like, this sucks. I know Priya is senior to you, which can make managing these issues that much harder. Okay, so now we've discussed what validation is, what it isn't. In terms of why it's important, I made the bold claim that validation is a superpower, but of course, the research is a bit more nuanced than that. So here's what we know: validation improves relationships, and it does so by transforming how they feel. Study after study has proven that validating someone increases their sense of trust, intimacy, and psychological safety. Not surprisingly, research has consistently shown validation to be among the strongest predictors of relational outcomes, ranging from commitment to quality across various types of relationships. This is really important given the effect relationships have on our health and our life expectancy. Having poor social relationships is associated with the same death rate as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Data shows that the quality of a person's relationships can increase their probability of surviving by 50%. Although this might sound dramatic, the science is clear. Improve your relationships, increase your life expectancy. Number two, validation decreases conflict. Validating someone is basically like adding an adorable cat filter to yourself. It makes you immediately less threatening and infinitely harder to argue with. Why? The question appears to be in how it affects the validated person's physiology. So, as someone becomes more upset, their ability to reason, recall, or focus, it sharply decreases. And that's because their sympathetic nervous system takes over and their response options are limited to fight, flee, or freeze. Validation tempers this response. It decreases sympathetic arousal and increases a person's ability to take the other person's perspective. Validating people in highly stressful situations, including conflicts, has been shown to decrease their heart rate, their galvanic skin response or sweating, and even their negative emotions. So, not surprisingly, invalidation has proven to have the opposite effect. It increases distress and exacerbates conflict. Finally, as I've said, validating people increases your influence. So I spoke to this before, but I want to clarify what I mean by influence, okay, or influencing. So by that, I mean getting people to listen to you. You give advice, they take it. You tell them what to do, they do it. In order to increase your influence, you need people to listen and talk to you. Validation is a bit of a silver bullet here in that it has proven to do both. In study after study, we find that people not only open up and talk more after being validated, they're also significantly more likely to follow the example and heed the advice of those who validate them. Okay, so you now know that validation communicates that one is mindful, understands, and empathizes with another person's experience, thus accepting it as valid. You know that validation is not praise, agreement, or problem solving. Some woman who wrote a book on it swears it's a superpower, but at the very least, you know it's been proven to improve relationships, decrease conflict, and increase a person's influence. So now let's get to how you actually validate someone. As I mentioned earlier, DBT introduced a set of skills to help therapists reliably and effectively communicate validation. I've expanded and adapted these skills so that they can be used by anyone in any relationship using a framework I call the validation ladder. And this ladder includes three subsets of skills that correspond to each of those three main qualities of validation. Let me just share and make sure I am sharing my screen with you now. All right. Can you guys see that? I hope so. Great. So as you can see here, we've got these three core qualities of validation: mindfulness, understanding, and empathy. And I will fill this in with the actual skills in a moment. But before going further, I just want to make two important points about the framework. First, these skill sets are listed in order of strength. So the mindfulness skills, which again you'll see in a moment, they don't typically convey a very high degree of validation. as they're generally just used to signal that you're paying attention non judgmentally. The empathy skills at the top are the most validating, as they convey mindfulness, understanding, and empathy in one fell swoop. Okay, the second point is that the skill sets lower on the ladder help you develop the qualities that the higher skill sets require. That means the mindfulness skills double as tools for developing understanding and empathy, in addition to communicating mindful awareness. Okay. And the understanding skills help you generate empathy. Each skill set helps you cultivate the understanding and empathy that the more impactful skills require. Note, this means that using these skills doesn't only affect the other person, they affect you. Okay. So here I've got all the skills filled in. As you can see, we've got two skills for communicating mindfulness, that's attending and copying. We've got three for understanding and three for empathy. Now, these skills, they're not listed in order of strength. So each skill set is more impactful than the one before it, but the skills in each skill set are more or less like interchangeable. So copying isn't any more powerful than attending, for example. I just laid them out this way because they form the acronym accepted, which is how people will feel if you use them effectively. And I think is super cute. Okay. So now that you've got a sense of the model, let's take a closer look at each of these skills. I should note that in any given situation, you always want to communicate the highest degree of validation that you authentically can. This is important because if you are not being authentic, you are not validating. Okay. If it's not authentic, it's not validation. It's manipulation or exploitation or some other word that rhymes with validation, but it is not that. If you don't understand or empathize with someone, the mindfulness skills might be the only ones you can use. Okay, so those first two skills, attending and copying. For attending, you just need to pay attention, ask questions, or comment without being judgmental. And now I get into the specifics of how to do this effectively in my book. But generally speaking, it comes down to listening for specific types of information and using certain nonverbals. So, as an example, imagine that a member of your team comes to you, their manager, and says, "It turns out we had a major coding issue. It was frustrating to work through, but I think I found a solution." Nodding along thoughtfully while the team member explains the solution and asking something like, "When did you find the time to work on this?" Those are examples of attending. The second mindfulness skill is copying. Here, you just literally mimic or copy the other person's words or body language. Saying something like, "You came in every day over the holiday break," if that's what they said, that would be an example of copying. Real quick, although copying might sound mechanical, it's worth noting that we are hardwired to mimic the facial expressions and utterances of others. Okay. Doing so activates mirror neurons, which allow us to physiologically and emotionally connect with the other person's experience. In fact, we're more likely to copy people in positions of power and those we find attractive, presumably because it was evolutionarily advantageous for us to connect with and understand these individuals. However, nowadays, copying is perhaps most effective when we're struggling to connect. In fact, studies on just this one skill, copying, show that it reliably reduces prejudice, increases empathy, and builds trust, both in the copier and the person being copied. Okay. Now, if you immediately understand the other person's situation, or your attending and copying have given you some insight, you can then use the understanding skills. And you've got three options here. The first is contextualizing. Here, you're just speaking to the chain of cause and effect that contributed to someone's reaction. All right. So saying something like, I understand why you're hurt given all you've done. Oh, sorry, that was the wrong example. Sorry about that. I meant to say, this has been particularly frustrating given that you have flagged concerns about the coding back in the fall. That would be an example of contextualizing. Okay. On the other hand, sometimes just hearing that our reaction is normal or equal to how others would respond, regardless of any broader context, sometimes that's really validating. And this is known as equalizing or normalizing. Saying something along the lines of anyone who spent their holiday break working while everyone else was vacationing would be frustrated. That is an example of equalizing. It signals that the individual's reaction is similar to how you or somebody else would react. Okay. Now remember, it's not that one of these is better than the other. It's just kind of whichever works best for the situation. Okay. And now, last but not least, for the understanding skills, we have proposing, AKA mind reading. Proposing has you guess an individual's thoughts, feelings, wishes, etc., based on what they've shared or what you know about the situation. Okay. So saying something like, this sounds like a recipe for burnout, that would be an example of proposing, presuming the other person hasn't already said that to you. Okay. So now we have reached the top of the validation ladder where the empathy skills reside. Again, the three skills in this section not only communicate empathy, but also understanding and mindfulness. Executing them well and in the right circumstances can communicate a high degree of validation. However, something I didn't mention earlier, because I did not want to scare you off, is that the higher you go up this ladder, the harder the fall is if you slip up. You aren't, you're not gonna really screw things up in a relationship if your attempts to attend don't go over well, right? It's not going to cause irreparable damage. However, some of these skills higher up the ladder can. All right. So taking action, that's our first empathy skill. It has you directly intervene with resources, support, or help. So saying, I'm going to speak with leadership about setting up a review process so that this doesn't happen again, that would be an example of taking action. Listening to a podcast someone recommended, that could be taking action in a small way. Using your star power to raise awareness and advocate on behalf of the 9/11 first responders, that was an example of taking action. These acts are important because they require you to invest yourself in the situation. That is what makes them impactful. You are not just observing or commenting on someone's experience, you're entering into it. Now, again, this can go sideways quickly. So if you use this too much, you might quickly find yourself in codependent relationships or interfering with people developing the skills they need to manage situations themselves. So I discuss these issues and how to avoid them more in my book. Okay, emoting. Emoting has you express genuine emotion or break character, shaking your head in disbelief or dropping your jaw, perhaps letting a "God damn it" slip as the other person discusses the situation. These are subtle ways of emoting, of showing that you're upset too, you're affected as well. Tearing up, as many of my colleagues did when I told them that I had been diagnosed with breast cancer 3 years ago, that was emoting. Or tearing up as Jon Stewart did when advocating for the first responders in that clip I can't stop referencing. That was an example of emoting. Again, with this skill, there's this sense that you are actively entering into the other person's experience. You're feeling excited or sad with, not for them. The difference between that with and for is everything. Last but not least, we have disclosure, wherein you share a common experience. For example, you might say something like, please don't repeat this, but one of the reasons I left Google is because I felt like I was picking up the slack. Disclosure really elevates I get it to I get it. Okay. It brings you face to face with the other person, showing them that you see yourself in them and allowing them to see themselves in you. Disclosure can be a difficult needle to thread. especially in the workplace. So if you're interested in more tips on how to use the skill effectively, again, refer to my book. So those are the 8 validation skills. That's what I mastered in becoming a therapist. And I want to stress that when I first learned validation skills, I was not blown away by their novelty. I'm guessing most of you have heard or done many of the things that I listed in this list. The transformative power in these skills becomes apparent once you've honed, internalized, and mastered how to move between them. I always say that validation is like baking. Okay. The steps involved seem deceptively straightforward, right? Whisking eggs, squeezing a tube of icing. On paper, this all seems pretty straightforward. But if a novice and a master baker follow the same recipe, the outcome will be noticeably different. Timing, technique, and understanding how to pivot when needed, these minor adjustments make all the difference. Lastly, I open this talk by appealing to your desire to change, influence, or get through to someone. I want to close by speaking to a more vulnerable desire, dare I say, need that we share, which is to love and be loved. I've laid out a method to communicate acceptance consistently and effectively. It just so happens that acceptance is a defining feature of love, not separate or independent from it. I hope you'll use these skills to be more effective, not just in influencing change, but in cultivating and communicating acceptance. This, I believe, is what it truly means to love and be loved. That's it, folks. Thanks for listening. I'll take some questions now. Let's see. Okay. So I've got, lots here. Okay. Was there a personal moment that made you realize how life-changing validation could be? I mean, apart from my personal experiences in therapy, I would also say that observing how damaging invalidation can be, that was something that I unfortunately experienced a lot of, in my life. Um, I uh Oh, can you hear me? Oh! Oh, sure, sorry. Yeah. Alright, is that better? Okay. Um yeah, I had a lot of medical stuff going on, and I found a lot of what I experienced in the healthcare system to be very invalidating. And those few moments when a doctor connected or validated my struggle, even if it wasn't showing up on tests or whatever yet, that was just so transformative to my personal health that I think it became really real to me how critical this stuff is. Um, what should we do when we need validation but don't know how to ask for it? Yeah, really, really important question here because most of the time when we go to people with our issues, we want to feel heard. And most of the time, what people respond with is problem solving. And sometimes that's needed, but a lot of times it isn't. And so in my family, frankly, we have this language where we would say, like, I'm looking for validation, not problem solving. Um, for you, it might sound more like I'm looking for a sounding board, or I want to feel seen or heard. Just these little signals that help people almost switch gears because I genuinely believe that people do want to help. They just don't realize that they're not hitting the nail they want to hit. Okay. In a workplace, especially with leaders, how can validation become a culture, not just a one time gesture? Okay. Um, this is pretty central to a lot of the work that I do in the corporate sector. And what I have leaders and companies focus on is validating the person, praising the work, but validating the person. All right. Typically, in work settings, we focus all of the attention on praise because it's all focused on the output, right? Or the work. And although praise can feel good, and there's nothing inherently bad with it, it also feels hollow. Okay. So in that example I talked through, which was a real example, I should mention, of a CEO that I worked with who had a report, who had spent the Christmas break coming in and working on this coding issue. He initially responded with a lot of praise, like, "This is great work. This is brilliant. Thank you so much. I see so much promise in you," yada, yada, yada. In talking through it, we realized that there was opportunity here to validate the person. All right. So fine, praise the work, but also circle back to, wow, you came in for every single day on the vacation. That sucks. Like, you must be feeling burnt out. And so it's this balance of both focus on the output, but see the person behind it. Yeah. Let me see. What do you hope people unlearn after reading your book or listening to this session? I want people to challenge the idea that external validation is bad. And here's why. By external validation, people are typically referring to praise. Okay. What they're saying is you shouldn't rely on external praise or positive judgments from others. And I agree with that. I think actually the more we seek out praise, the more we start to distort ourselves or filter ourselves to meet or exceed people's expectations. I think that can be problematic. However, I absolutely believe that you should be in relationships in which you feel seen and accepted. Everybody needs to feel like they belong. Um, there was a great social psychologist, Mark Leary. I'm going to butcher his quote, but he said something to the effect of, "People differ from animals not so much in their desire or need to associate, but in their need to feel accepted and to belong." And I think that that is not something that we do a great job of talking about, of labeling. And if anything, I think we have some confusing language around seeking validation. Okay. How can someone start building the muscle of validation if they've never done it before? Um, I have so those skills that you guys saw, I have my clients work on one skill a week. All right. And actually the exercises and the approach that I explain in my book is the same one that I used when I was training and mastering these skills myself. So essentially, you just practice one skill a week. You've got certain exercises that you're doing, and then you just kind of add another skill each week. And then by the end of those 8 weeks, you should have a fair degree of success. If you're doing, the exercises and actually working it on a daily basis. Yeah, great question. Um, okay. What's your take on emotional minimalism? The idea that not everything needs to be named or validated. Okay, this gets to a point that I actually wanted to include in the talk, but I cut it because I had too much information. Uh, yeah, absolutely. Not everything needs to be named or validated, if for no other reason than the fact that not everything is valid. Okay, so one of the most impactful things I learned as a therapist was to look for what we call the kernel of truth in another person's experience. So it's by experience, as psychologists, we typically say an experience consists of their thoughts, their emotions, or their behavior. All three of those things may not be valid. I just need to find the one that is. Okay. So if someone is listening to misinformation and they think that, there's a threat of an alien invasion and only this politician can save them from it, they're going to vote for that politician, right? That behavior makes sense given what they're thinking. Their thoughts don't make sense, but the behavior does. And the emotions do. The emotions of fear, the desire to be protected. All of that makes sense. It's just that they're operating off of misinformation. We've got this innate negativity bias that predisposes us to focus on what's wrong. All right. So rather than looking for the kernel of truth, we tend to focus on what is wrong first. That is a mistake. So mastering validation is really an exercise in attending to what is valid, getting really good at spotting that, particularly when it's difficult to see it, and then communicating that back. And time and again, you'll see that there is this kind of opening, this relaxing that happens through that process, wherein you can actually target the invalid more directly and more effectively. Okay. Um, what's your advice for people who grew up with the tough love mindset and who see validation as weakness or indulgence? I want to be very clear here because the research on invalidation is incredibly clear. You might be able to get someone to perform well or behave well through invalidation in the same way that you might be able to get an animal to, perform tricks if you beat them into submission. But that is not going to be in the best interest of that person's mental health. The research on invalidation is shocking. It is believed to play a causal role in some of the most devastating mental health issues that we know of: borderline personality disorder, major depression, post traumatic stress disorder, psychopathy. All of these diseases have at their core a history of invalidation, oftentimes, not always. So it's serious stuff. And you don't need to rely on that method. Like, I agree, it can work, but positive reinforcement and validation works as well. Um, okay. I feel that validation can backfire in toxic dynamics, like with a narcissistic boss. How do we deal with someone like that? Someone who might use this validation as fuel. Okay. So I know my all my therapy stories, it might seem like, well, this doesn't apply to me. But it helps me make this point, which is that these strategies, these skills were developed for working or in working with people who have severe personality disorders, be it narcissism or borderline personality disorder. We use validation to be effective in those dynamics. So, part of what's critical here is that you are never saying anything you don't believe. Okay. And you're not just praising people, you are making a point of showing the validity that you see in what they're saying. All right. And often people with personality disorders, they are trying to feel and get a sense of validation because they're having trouble feeling it from within. And rather than depriving them of it, what we find is that when we model it and provide it, they are much more likely to develop the ability to validate themselves over time. Not that you need to be like intervening on your boss's mental health problems. Okay, I think I answered that. Um, how would you handle a situation where you validate a harmful or unethical choice without condoning it? Sure. Usually, the approach I take here is contextualizing. So I look at the chain of cause and effect, and there is always a cause for every effect. And I try to understand how that contributed to the outcome. Okay. And I make that explicit. It makes sense that you slapped that guy. I mean, you were pushed around your whole life by your parents, right? Healthy regulation or communication of emotion was never modeled for you. Like, I see how you got here. That doesn't mean it's okay, right? But if anything, in order to intervene effectively, you have to identify and talk about the factors that are contributing to what you see. So I actually think it's part of having that conversation effectively is to not judge or shame the other person, It's not going to be constructive. People, you know, aren't their best selves under feeling extreme shame. You want them to be able to objectively look at what's going on so that they can effectively intervene. Okay. Um, Let me see if there are some. Am I missing any questions here, guys? Let's see. How do I see the in real time ones? Hmm. Okay. As validation is to hear others better, what is that term called to be heard by others? Is there a science methodology to that as well? Um, I'm not sure if I'm understanding this question correctly because I think what you're desiring, the desire to be heard by others is validation, right? You want them to validate you. And yes, the validation, the research on it is what I reviewed here. Um, okay. Does this mean I disagree vehemently, but I will still say I understand your viewpoint? This is me as a mother to my 28-year-old child. Um, am I not to step in with my viewpoint or solutions? So again, you might not agree with their viewpoint. And please don't get in the business of validating things that aren't valid. You'll reinforce all sorts of problems. Okay. What you might be able to validate is their emotions. So emotions are like your get out of jail free card in validation because we say emotions are always valid. I mean, technically they're not, but unless you're a psychologist, you don't want to be in the business of telling people that they don't feel what they're telling you they feel. All right. If someone is upset, if someone is confused, if someone is scared, that's valid. Okay. They genuinely feel that way. And you might not agree with the beliefs that lead them to those emotions, but you can validate the emotion. Suffering sucks, regardless of what's causing it. Okay. And really just trying to use those skills to be mindful, to understand the experience better so that you can find something that you can validate at a higher level, that is the practice. Okay. Um, oh, studio chat. Let's see. Studio chat, sure. Oh, I think I got through many of them. Um, Here's an interesting one. Which validation skills work best over digital mediums, like email, chat, etc.? So with digital mediums, it can be copying can be really interesting, and in fact, it's kind of my go-to. So, for instance, you want to pay close attention to the emojis people use, to whether or not they end with exclamation points or they're just periods the whole way. Like all of this stuff is signaling kind of how this person is comfortable communicating. Okay. And that is their language. And so if you speak to someone in their language, you're going to seem more relatable to them. Okay. Wrapping up, guys. Thank you so much for listening. Next session is upcoming on Thursday, and it's called "Finding Joy in Everyday Life" by Vedanta expert Jaya Rowe. All right, guys. Take care. Thank you for listening.